Behind Closed Doors is a series produced by Somerset Community TV, the Skowhegan Women's Club, and the Family Violence Project. This program aims to create a dialogue around domestic violence with the help of special guests and local health professionals. We discuss the many ways our community is affected by this issue and the resources available to help curb and reduce it.
Good morning. My name is Vi Ferlin, and I'm Vice President of the Skowhegan Women's Club. The Skowhegan Women's Club is sponsoring 6 programs on family violence. We did the first one in January on family violence, and this month, February, we are doing one on teenage dating. And now I will introduce you to Michelle LeClaire, and she will take over from here.
Hello, I'm Michelle LeClaire with the Family Violence Project here in Kennebec and Somerset counties. I'm the Community Awareness and Prevention Educator, and we'll all introduce ourselves.
I'm Mike Pike. I'm the Domestic Violence Investigator with the Somerset County District Attorney's Office, and I'm also a part-time school resource officer for the Somerset County Sheriff's Office.
I'm Emma Peck. I'm a student at Maine Arts Academy.
And I'm Shauna Lund. I'm the Prevention and Awareness Educator for Kennebec, Northern Kennebec, and Somerset counties.
Awesome. So the reason teen dating violence is our topic this month is because February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So we're going to look at what teen dating violence looks like, who it impacts, what the impacts are, as well as the school environment, and other things that contribute, and then what the resources are for anyone experiencing this. And then our services as well. So let's start by talking about what does teen dating violence look like. Can anyone give an example of, what they've seen as far as teen dating violence?
I would say what I've seen in my experience in working with the schools in Somerset County, I work primarily in Kennebec and Bingham school districts, but I think probably these observations could be applied to just about any school in Somerset County. It seems like emotional abuse and perhaps psychological or verbal abuse are what we predominantly see with our teenage population. Not to say that the physical abuse doesn't happen, it just seems like it's not out there, perhaps or seen as much in the school as the name calling, the putting down, control of emotions, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I talk to students, and if I use the example or give the definition of one person trying to gain power and control over another, that's not clear. But if we start giving examples of, does your partner try to control who you're hanging out with, friends that you're talking to, family, what sports you play, where you're going, that opens up more of a conversation. Some of this, what we consider abusive behaviors, some teens don't see that. They feel like, oh, my partner, he or she, they're not jealous. That's not jealousy. They just love me. They care about me. They're asking me to prove what class I'm in or who I'm with because they love me. So our language, I think, is really important. The terms that we use when we say domestic violence, really asking, like, what type of relationship, what kind of things does your partner do? And then that's when I start to get into, is it healthy or unhealthy behaviors?
Mm-hmm. I think Shauna makes a really good point. A lot of the teens I've talked to, that I, as an outside observer, looking in, might think, well, this is kind of not a healthy relationship, or this might be an abusive, what I might classify as an abusive situation. And the kids don't always immediately recognize that. And I think, like you said, Shauna, it's important that we be asking the right questions and also presenting the information to kids in our schools so they can be aware of what relationship violence looks like.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've seen, for an example, one of my friends was talking to this guy a while back, and she's very open about her opinions politically, and he would insult her every time she brought it up. He would say that she was a bigot, and he would start insulting her physically, saying that she's basically not good enough. And after a while, she finally decided that she just needed to drop him and that it wasn't good for her. And from the moment I met him, I knew that there was something bad, but I don't know, I wanted to support her because she really seemed to like him. But after a while I was like, you can't keep talking to this guy, this isn't okay.
And it is so, like, definitely the emotional abuse there of, like, putting her down because of her opinions. And, she chose to leave him and said a lot of people choose to stop stating their opinions. That's, there are definitely options, and, that's, good for her for being able to do that and for knowing that that was an option and a safe option for her. Because that is, there are so many reasons why people stay with people who are using these abusive tactics. And I'm glad she was able to, be like, there's not enough good. Because oftentimes they'll be like, oh, this is the only thing my partner does. There are all these other things. And so we know that people will often stay with abusive partners and just change their, change what they're doing. A lot of people would just stop sharing their opinions. And so I'm glad that and it sounds like she had that support from family and friends to make her own choices, which is good.
And I think you make a good point, Emma, about the importance of peer support, especially for teenagers. It seems like, having the support of friends, people in their lives is very important. And, having someone that can say to you, hey, this looks like an unhealthy situation or an unsafe situation for you to be in, I think is so important. And I guess I would ask all of you, since you're experts in the field, how can someone who maybe sees an unhealthy relationship, a friend or a relative, how can they be supportive of someone in that situation? What are some things that someone could do to help support someone?
A good example is to listen without judgment. Like get an understanding, build trust. That would be the first thing I would say if someone comes to us, is to listen, and believe what's going on. We shouldn't tell somebody, you need to leave your partner, but be there as support and guidance and offer some resources. Because if we start saying you need to leave them, or they're such a nice person, I can't believe that would happen, then they're not going to open up or come back to us. So we're not going to stop the violence or be able to do anything about it if we don't offer some resources and be open and understanding.
And validate their feelings. I think like what Emma did, this is your choice, but how they're treating you, that isn't okay. So being there with them through that. And we do talk a lot about that towards the end. So I want to focus on what the emotional violence can look like right now. But thank you for that. Sprinkle it in here and there because it always comes up of how do we support. So we have the teen power and control wheel. We shared the original power and control wheel the last time, and so we have this one which will pop up occasionally. So looking at some of the things here, we've talked about peer pressure, so threatening to expose someone's weaknesses or spread rumor, telling malicious lies. We know that's a huge reality that teens face, especially with social media, the way information spreads like wildfire. And so that can be a really big thing that happens as far as if you don't do this, I'm going to tell everyone. And we talked about that as far as sexual violence too, forcing someone to do things that they don't want to do, like forcing them to have sex. And if you don't do this, I'll tell everyone A, B, or C.
I've heard a lot of threats. If you break up with me, I'm going to commit suicide. That is one of the standard things that I hear in almost all the high schools I go to when I'm doing one-on-one advocacy with a teen, is that their partner has threatened suicide or to expose them for either sexual acts that they've done or haven't done, but they'll start the rumors
And that, so
Wow.
that opens up like the names that kids are called of like prude or, or the reverse slut, whore. And so we may be using some language. I meant to open it up by saying we're probably going to use some language that, you may not be used to, but we want to open that up because these are the realities that teens are facing. So we want to give parents an idea of like, so you can be able to talk to your kids about this without sugarcoating it, because they need to know that you hear them and you support them too. And please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself while we're talking about this, because this is very intense material. It can bring up a lot of emotions. Our phone number, I think, should be on the bottom. So if you need to call and speak with an advocate, you can absolutely do that. We're here 24 hours a day to speak to people who are experiencing abuse, but also family and friends who need that support, because we know that this is hard stuff, and we know that you want to know how to best support your loved one. So there are lots of names that can get called with that, lots of rumors. What are some other things that people see around this wheel?
So, going around the wheel, I see all of it in schools as far as intimidation. One student says, my partner punches the wall. At least they don't punch me. And then I open that up and ask the class, like, would that make you worried for that person? And they say yes, because that's using intimidation and instilling fear in their partner to get what they want.
I think isolation exclusion is another one we see quite a bit.
Yeah.
Controlling who the person can hang out with, who they can be friends with, who they spend their time with. Some controlling relationships I've been familiar with. Basically, the abuser wants the person under their control to spend all of their time with them,
Yeah.
and know where they are, who they're talking to, where they're going.
A student said to me
Yeah.
that they have to take a picture when they're in the class and send it to their partner so that their partner knows who they're sitting next to and that they are in class.
And I think a lot of these principles, we see with our adult population that we work with, and it definitely filters down into teenage relationships as well.
And go ahead.
Sorry. A while back, as sort of an example, there was this couple that I knew, teenagers, and whenever we would go to dances, church dances, we would dance with different people. Dancing with someone doesn't mean that they're in love with you, so we would just dance with our friends. But this couple, whenever one of them danced with someone else, the other would have to know the name, who they are, where they're from, and it was a mutual thing, but I don't know, it just seemed that if they didn't have that trust to just know that they wouldn't go off with that person they were dancing with or whatever, that then they needed to, I don't know, work on their relationship, work on that trust, maybe, that's all I got.
Yeah.
It's important to know before you get into a relationship what you really want out of that relationship, right? Or is respect important? Is trust important? And like we talked a little bit about before, about boundaries, if that boundary is crossed, do you end the relationship, or do you continue that? Do you work on trust? So that's for each of us to decide on our own, what we want in a relationship. But I heard you mention trust. That's, if that's what builds your relationship and your partner doesn't trust you, do you stay? Do you continue that relationship? So it's important to think about that.
And it's hard because some of those things can come like from a really innocent place to begin with, or seemingly innocent, with like, control. It turns into controlling who you're with or where you are, but it can be like, oh, I'm really worried about you. I know how other guys can be, or other girls. I just want to make sure you're safe. I just want to, it can look really innocent and sweet and make it seem like it's coming from a place of love. Like, oh, I just care about you so much. I don't want you leaving me for someone else. I just want to I just want to be there for you. So it can seem like from a place that is not abusive, but at the end of the day, if it's not feeling good, if it's not feeling like a safe thing, what if your friend didn't tell her partner or his partner who it was? What would the repercussions of that be? What would that look like? That's when it becomes less of a choice and less of a boundary and more of like something a partner is imposing on the other.
And we should probably also clarify that these things don't happen overnight. Like you were saying, Michelle, they start out very innocently sometimes. He cares about me, he's just paying attention to me because he loves me so much. And then gradually over time it devolves into something more than that.
A pattern. It becomes a
Right.
pattern.
And if you're in that situation every day and you live that situation every day, it might not become readily apparent until maybe a trusted friend or parent can recognize it and bring it forward.
Right.
And a lot of the time, I look at minimize, deny, or blame, those things. So if you do bring up something that is of concern in the relationship and your partner is always blaming you, well, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't have done this. If you would have just answered your phone like I told you to, I wouldn't have,
We wouldn't be having this argument.
Right. And so a lot of, if people are minimizing and denying and blaming all the time, putting everything on one partner, it being their fault, that's a big, that's a sign also of like, maybe this isn't a healthy relationship. And it's hard to use healthy and unhealthy because we know like people sometimes blame each other, but if it's the pattern, like Shauna said, the pattern of ongoing things that are happening. And so who does this happen to? I want to go, because I think we're using a lot of gendered language, but who can this happen to?
Happen to anyone.
Anybody.
Right.
Regardless of socioeconomic status, I mean, domestic violence can affect anyone in our community, young or old, or male or female.
Yeah.
It doesn't
know,
matter
we-
orientation,
Right.
right? Or gender.
Right. I mean, we do oftentimes when we talk about abusers use he and victims or survivors as she simply because the statistics, the majority of domestic violence survivors are female and domestic violence perpetrators are male. Not to say that it doesn't happen in reverse, but the statistics, the numbers that we see every day kind of bear that out, that that's the majority of cases that we experience.
Yeah, we see 1 in 3 teens report just in the 4 years of high school that either themselves or they know someone that has experienced some form of violence that we've talked about. In Maine, in 2015, through the Integrated Youth Health Survey, they go in and ask teens from the previous year, have you experienced any violence, physical violence? And it was 8.3 of teens stated that they know someone or have dated someone that has been physically violent to them. And then the statistics go up a little higher. So gay and lesbian students report 19.2 that they have been physically hurt or know someone that's been physically hurt at least once. Bisexual is 18.3 and heterosexual students was 6.7. That gives the number of the 8.3 of high schoolers.
So we know kids in the LGBTQ plus community are disproportionately
Yes.
higher at risk.
At risk.
So, so this happens a lot to
Mhm.
teens.
1 in 3. So
Yeah.
there's more than 3 people in this room now. So it's important. That's why we're here, to raise awareness and see what we can do to prevent this from happening.
And then what's the impact on the teens? Like talking about, so 1 in 3 teens are experiencing this. How does this affect them?
Well, I think it can have a number of potential outcomes. I mean, there's some statistics out there that show that people that are victims of dating violence have higher likelihood of committing suicide, becoming involved in risky behaviors such as drug or alcohol use, other types of reckless behavior. So it's really a health issue. It becomes more than just a community concern, but it becomes a genuine issue of health for that young person as they move toward adulthood.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've seen eating disorders, depression.
Anorexic, yes. I've
Cutting.
seen that.
Yeah.
And if in the relationship, if the guy or the girl, it can be either one, if one of them does something sexually that the other is not okay with, and that they sorry, I lost my train of thought. If one of them does something like sexual abuse after the relationship is over, that person, like, they can't erase that.
Right.
It's always with them, and it can sometimes ruin other relationships. They'll be scared to do anything if they want to. They shouldn't if they're teenagers. But it's just scary to, after that relationship is over, it's scary to get back into the dating pool and to see other people.
Because if you're, you know, being forced to have sex by your partner, like, that's someone that you're supposed to be able to trust, right? And if they're forcing you to do that, that really shatters your foundation of who you can trust, and also in yourself, because I feel like there's, in our society especially, there's so much blame that happens, like, oh, if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't been alone with them, if you hadn't had a drink of alcohol, you know, there's a lot of blame and shame that goes on victims. So it makes sense that they'd be like, who can I trust? Because you are supposed to be able to wholly trust this other person, and so that has a huge impact on you.
Well, I think it's interesting to know too that of the 33% of teens that have been victims of emotional or dating violence, of that, only a third of those folks involved come forward and report. Feel, you know, supported enough to tell someone.
And why do you think that is, that only a third come forward?
I think there could be a myriad of reasons for that. Maybe they don't have someone in their life that they find trustworthy, but it could be even more, maybe they're thinking, well, this is something that I need to deal with on my own. I don't want to involve anybody else. I don't want to burden anyone else with this. And again, it might come down to also recognizing that they're in a potentially
awareness.
abusive situation.
And could they be threatened at times? Say, if you tell on me, I'm gonna
Absolutely.
hurt you
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, safety is a huge
Yeah.
issue.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of times people don't recognize how abusive their relationship is, especially
With
because
their partner.
how abusive their partner is. Thank you. Language makes a difference. We're learning. So it's not the relationship that's abusive. It's not like the relationship is doing it. It's your partner. The partner is doing this, is acting in these ways to control their partner. So a lot of I've talked to a young person the other day who, you know, they didn't recognize that their partner was abusive until they got out, and then they were realizing all of these little things that they did, you know, anything that they cared about, you know, their partner would put them down for, you know, and realizing it really after leaving. And it's hard because there's still that love, you know, they were with the partner for a long time, and I think that's normal too, to still care for your partner. But, and then there's guilt for that because they're like, well, they weren't a good person. Why do I still have feelings? And, but it's really normal because it wasn't all bad. And so we understand that too. And we'll never make people feel bad about still caring for their ex or their current partner, because we know that it's not all bad, but not understanding and not recognizing, because you don't, and no one wants to be a victim. I think that's a phrase that we use, is like, oh, a victim of domestic violence, a victim of intimate partner violence. No one wants to feel like they're the victim. And so, you know, that's why we often use the language survivor, or just person who experienced abuse, because we're all people in this world, and if victim doesn't resonate with you, we totally get that.
A lot of times it's the teen's first relationship, you know, and we got to look at what were the role models, where did they learn what a relationship is supposed to look like from maybe their parents, friends, family, internet, you know, like where do you learn this? So it's important to foster like empathy, communication, respect, and I keep coming back to like knowing what you want out of a relationship. That's so important. So we go into schools to talk about this. Right from preschools, how to share your feelings and what to do with those feelings. If you're angry, what do you do with that? What does it look like? Those are things to talk about in our schools and in our communities, and any faith-based activities that you do or extracurriculum activities, if it's dance, music, really, how do we foster relationships in many different ways that are age appropriate, you know? So
Right.
it's something to think about. If they didn't have that, to know that you're supposed to communicate respectfully, you know, do we start in high schools and talk about it to raise awareness? Yeah, that's where, you know, we can do our
Yeah.
part.
And knowing how to express feelings, like you had given the example of like when they're angry, they punch the wall or they punch the locker. And, you know, anger is a really normal feeling and it's okay to be angry, but learning how to express that in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else, doesn't intimidate anyone else is really important. So like learning how to express your anger, like I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to take a few deep breaths and sort of steep in my anger because it's okay to be angry. But I'm going to do something else with it than intimidate my partner, because it's not okay to intimidate your partner out of anger, or hurt your partner out of anger.
And I think it's important to recognize too that abusive behavior is always a choice. It's not the survivor's fault if someone chooses to put their hands on them or to verbally abuse them or emotionally abuse them. It's always a choice to
Mhm.
abuse, and it doesn't matter if the person making that choice is male or female or whatever type of background they might have in their life, or you know, the type of environment they were raised in. It's still a choice that that person has to make to abuse.
Mhm.
We just ask people make a better choice.
Yeah, and that may come with like a lot of work on their part too, and we talk about how our society doesn't really foster that kind of work. Like giving males as an example, we really don't give them a lot of options as far as feelings, and you know, we say it's not okay to cry and it's not okay to express your feelings unless it's anger. So I mean, as a society, we have work to do. But like seeing a counselor, if someone's growing up in a family where they're witnessing their parents be abusive to each other, or witnessing one being abusive to the other, you know, that does do a lot to a person. So being able to get help for that, and seek their own healing for that is really important too. So what are some other things, because we've talked about this as far as like teen dating violence, but what also makes it different from, you know, adult intimate partner violence? We talked about how it's like maybe their first relationship, so they're still learning to navigate what a relationship looks like, what's normal, what's not normal. What are some other ways that it can be different for teens?
So when I think about schools, it's forced interaction. Like you're in the classroom, and without the school knowing that you could be in the classroom with your abusive partner. So some barriers would be, you know, small schools. Are you able to change classes, but that your partner or ex-partner is still there? There's different limitations as far as safety planning too. Money may be one, access to, or lack of access to transportation to leave the school if a situation does come up. So there's a lot of barriers that teens face. Social media is huge. A lot of times in, you know, schools, they do a lot of work on their laptops. So to say to someone, go off Facebook, like how fair is that when that could be their livelihood, rather than looking at what the issue really is. It's not the computer that's the issue, it's the person behind it with the abusive behaviors.
So technology is a big way
It's
that
key.
kids are. I'm thinking back to the power and control wheel and like the things that kids can do with social media, with revenge porn. So can we define that for people who've not heard of it? What revenge porn is?
Revenge porn from a legal perspective basically is the sharing of intimate photos in various states of undress or what we might consider nude photographs with unauthorized persons. And an example might be if you're in a relationship with someone, you share intimate photos back and forth via cell phone. That relationship ends and suddenly the person in possession of some of those intimate images of the other person decides to share them with other friends on social media, that's what we're talking about with revenge porn. And unfortunately, it does happen, and it is a growing problem.
Mhm. And so that, I think victim blaming happens a lot with that too, because people be like, well, why did you send your partner this picture? Why did you make that choice? Instead of saying, why did this partner choose to send that to everyone? Because, that was sent with a lot of trust of like, this was for you, just you. And, it felt like the next step in the relationship. I think, is there a lot of pressure that teens face to do that? Do you know? Like, what do you guys...
I think there is. I don't think, we probably hear as much about it as probably people that are in that age group. I think it's not something that you can easily sit down with a parent and talk about, or even a teacher. But I do think it's real. And I think it's also important to recognize that if the images involve children under the age of 18, not only are we talking about the revenge porn piece, but we're also getting into the area of what could be considered child pornography, which is another really serious legal consideration.
And so, like, if kids are spreading that to other kids in the school, they're all in possession, which is scary. But also that person who's pictured is now all their other students and their student body have seen them, maybe their teachers, maybe parents. Like, that's really scary for a kid, for anyone, not just a teen, like for anyone. No one wants that out there. And so there are some impacts for that too, which, Shauna, we were talking about some of the impacts of that.
Yeah. Did you have something?
I was just going to say that once you send something to someone through social media, it's going to be on the internet forever. You can't get rid of it. So if they start to spread it around social media to other people, they could post it on like a public page, and then if, say, later on in life you want to apply for a job and they do a background check or something like that,
They Google you, because people do that.
We do that.
yeah, and they find that picture, they might not take you as seriously as they could have.
We do focus groups within the schools to find out what the atmosphere, environment, culture, what's going on in the schools. So we have a group of students and we ask a few questions like, what's the language that is used here in the schools? And a lot of times it's degrading language, like Michelle said, the B word and other derogatory names. But then we ask about, do students send nude pictures? Have you seen any? And we go into that. And out of our focus group, every single student has seen somebody's nude picture from either a friend of theirs that has a partner or has broken up with that partner. They've seen the nude pictures. So we go on there a little bit more and ask, like, okay, are there rumors? And they're like, yep, whether they've had sex or not. They spread the rumors that this has gone on. So I think that social media, sexting, and nude photos is a big thing in our schools, all the way down to junior high. I've had calls to come in to talk to students about sexting from 6th grade up.
Yeah. Well, and the CDC, as a matter of fact, and these numbers are from 2014, they talk about 72% of 13 and 14-year-old kids identify themselves or classify themselves as dating.
Right.
Involved in a relationship with someone else.
I remember one time when I was in 8th grade, one of my good friends had a pregnancy scare. She was dating a senior in high school, and she was still in 8th grade. And we were all like so scared for her because it was, what's the word? I can't remember the word, when like an older person.
Statutory or...
it would have been really bad for either of them, for both of them, if she had ended up being pregnant. She wasn't, and it was just, I had just never seen anything like that. I was in 8th grade, and it was just crazy to me that that stuff actually happens.
Yeah, Mike has a statistic about pregnancies on there that in an abusive relationship, I think it's 6 times more likely for a teen pregnancy. And why would anybody want to create a pregnancy as a teen? Is it to keep their partner, you know, to have that power and control. Like they may feel like their partner's going to break up with them. So it's important to think about there's condom tampering, birth control tampering, force, you know, like if you really love me, then we'll have sex and create a pregnancy.
It's scary.
And that reminds me of something, lost my train of thought again. You could, in high school, normally kids want to get back at their parents. They're angry at their parents for not letting them do stuff, so they'll go out with people that their parents don't approve of. And they'll get into these situations where bad things happen, and in the end, it's bad for their parents, but it more affects you, and it's more like you're hurting yourself, not your parents.
Well, and it's hard because they may have initially chosen to do that as a rebellion, but you know, it wasn't their fault that happened to them at the end of the day. Like that wasn't a choice they made to, you know, to be pressured into sex or to be forced to have sex. So I hope that they still feel like they can come forward, because even though they chose to go out with this person, there's still that level of trust of like, no matter what you do, no one has the right to do this to you. So even if that person had a reputation, it doesn't make it their fault that person may have forced them to have sex. So it's hard because that does have implications. And like, and talking about the texting and sexting in school, like, you know, stuff like that and all of these things, you know, we know kids that, you know, all the effects that we were talking about with depression and anxiety and PTSD, but also, you know, with the revenge porn, like some kids will stop going to school or want to change schools, that's so huge. Like that's so, you know, we know of teens who don't go to the same school because of everyone seeing that, or because of having their ex there, that's really scary. Everyone should be able to go to school and be healthy and happy. And when this is interfering with that, that's a real problem. I want to talk about another reason of like why it's harder as a teen, or what makes it different. Like I think when teens do come forward, sometimes adults can minimize their relationship or minimize the intensity by saying like, oh, it's just puppy love. You know, like we really, as adults, don't always put as much stock in these relationships that kids are having, because, you know, we just feel like, oh, I remember what it was like. You know, it feels so big to you, but it's, you know, I think
You'll
minimizing.
be fine, just move on.
Yeah. It's really easy, and it's not coming from a place of, you know, maliciousness, but like it really doesn't meet the student where they're at and may like keep them from reaching out again or being able to talk about it, which is really hard, because I know it's not the intention at all. So, but that happens. So should we talk about let's see. So school environment, we talked a little bit about school environment and about the forced interactions. We know that teachers and schools do the best they can. You know, we know they work really hard, and they have people like Shauna come in and do presentations. We'll talk a bit more about that after. But media, what are some influences media has? Like what are the messages we get from media around dating and everything else around that?
If we read the headlines in the papers, it's a lot of victim blaming. Anyway, if he or she were wearing something differently, then the rape wouldn't have occurred. You know, like we see that, or they were in a domestically violent relationship, and a relationship is not violent, the person is. So I think looking at the full picture of who did what to whom with what impact is big. It's something important to take a look at.
And like stalking is really minimized by the media. You know, I love a good rom-com, a good romantic comedy, but like in so many cases there's stalking that happens, and they're, you know, they attribute it to like, oh, they really care for this person, so that's why they're always showing up there. That's why they're, you know, constantly doing this. Even, and I mean, Sleepless in Seattle, I hadn't seen that in a while, but she like tracks down the guy's address and goes to Seattle to like follow them, and like that is some severe stalking there. But it's like played off as very romantic because, oh, she's so nice and she just really, she what they said on the radio really resonated with her. And, looking at music, Adam Levine, who was just on the Super Bowl last night, his animals video is so creepy and stalkery. But he's this famous musician and it's okay. I don't know. I think media definitely gives us some not so great messages.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And the language we use, with that media going along with it, that's where I always try to make a little bit of a change. Like if someone uses language that's not accountable or it's violent language, I try to change the sentence rather than bullet points. For example, like when we're doing presentations and someone may say, here's the bullet points of what we're going to go through, change that to something a little less violent. Here's the points we're going to go and talk about today. So media and language, it goes hand in
I
hand.
think just the amount of media that kids are inundated with today. I mean, 20 years ago, we had, the internet was still in its infancy. We had television, we had radio, we had magazines.
Not
but-
the 8 hours now
but
of
now
screen time.
with
where
Everyone basically having a screen that they stare at for hours on end.
Yeah.
The messages just never stop, whether it's Facebook or some other type of social media. There are certain expectations, it seems, that kids place upon themselves based on the messages they receive.
And the messages about what it means to be a man and a woman.
Yeah.
Like men, we expect men to be like studly and like womanizers, we expect them to always be getting some, and to give those messages to teens and have them have these expectations that aren't realistic. Like that's not really what it means to be a man, but that's what we make them think. And so that's hard. And what it means to be a woman, what it means to be, a teenage girl, like you're supposed to be doing all this stuff. You're supposed to be, I don't know, it's really...
And that's evident in our stores if we go in to shop, like walk into Target or Walmart, and there's a boy aisle, there's a girl aisle, like princesses and trucks, or men. We still do that. So it's being aware of that, and it's okay to play with doll or whatever. So I go into schools, like I said, to talk about that a little more. Ask, what does it look like in our schools?
What is the parents' role in all of this? Like talking about parents and how to support parents with, with their teens that might be in might be dating an abusive partner. Like, what does that look like? How can we support parents, or what are some messages for parents?
Well, I think it all starts at a very young age with being a good role model. Role modeling with your partner how you treat each other with respect, and how it's a partnership and how it's a give and take, and one person doesn't have dominion over the other. And those are messages that kids from a very young age, I think, they learn from how
Right.
their parents or the two primary caregivers in their lives interact with each other. So I think being cognizant of that, but also as they move up through adolescence and into the teenage years, being that resource, that support system for them, letting them know, hey, and one of the things I always told my kids when they were younger was, I may not always like the decisions that you make, but I'll always be here for you. You can always come and talk to me about it. Doesn't mean I may not get upset. I might not. That's just the parent in me. But
Right.
I'll always be here as a resource for you. And I think just reassuring kids of that, I think, can be so empowering.
Some of the teens that I've talked to said that their parents have taken their cell phone away so they can't talk to their partner. And so we look at the big picture. Like if they're taking the cell phone away and the partner is going to be very mad the next day when they see their partner, like, why didn't you text me? Why didn't you do this? So then what are the repercussions of that? Like really exploring. As a parent, we may think like, fine, I'll just solve this. You're not on social media anymore, or I'm taking your phone away. Is that really the right thing to do? I can't say yes or no, but I want to look at the big picture as a a parent, like, what is that going to do for my teen? What does that mean for my teen?
And it's hard because, like, if you find out your child is in a relationship with someone who's being abusive and using these abusive tactics, that's really scary. And I think of, like, Mama Bear, like, you aren't seeing this person. But as we know, I mean, as Emma said, like, you know, how often do kids want to, you know, oh, like, okay, like, I agree. No, kids want to do the opposite often. So by saying, no, you can't see this person, you know, they're going to find a way to see that person.
And then that makes it so they're not going to be open
Right.
or trusting and come to you if there is.
So being able to have a conversation of, like, you know, I'm really worried about your safety. Can we make a safety plan? You know, let's talk about this. Know that I'm always here for you, which sounds so opposite, and I bet would be really, really hard to do, like near impossible. But knowing that, being able to have that open line of communication with your child and be able to safety plan and being able to do that, you know, that ultimately will be the way to do that. Because if you just lock it down, like, kids are going to do what they want, which is really hard. I know that's really hard. So making a safety plan with the phone, like, you know, you can tell them it's my fault that you can't text them. We'll do one last text, you know, talk to the child about, like, how do we safety plan? What's going to be safest in doing this?
And when we say safety plan, it's like looking at the needs of the situation to try to keep that person safe. Like, what steps need to be in place.
Yeah, so maybe we should go into safety plans of, like, what are, or Emma, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna say, whenever my friends want me to hang out with them, and it's something that I'm not comfortable with doing, my parents will say, if you're not comfortable with it, and I mean, if I tell them that I'm not comfortable, I don't want to go, they're gonna be like, oh, you never want to hang out with us, and they'll put all the blame on me. But my parents say, and I don't like lying, but they say, if you really don't want to go, you can use me as an excuse that you're grounded, that I don't want you to go, and I just really appreciate that, because I don't want to get into situations with my friends where we do things that I'm not comfortable with. So I'm grateful that my parents allow me to use them as an excuse, because they say that they'd rather my friends not like them and hate on them than say all this stuff about me.
Right.
Yeah, that's a lot of social pressure.
And so helping you have those boundaries, and I'm like jumping around, but something that you said made me think about it too. Boundaries as a child too, being able to teach children bodily autonomy. You know, we think about, you know, oh, give your grandma a kiss. You know, if they say no, like, let that be no, because if they don't want to do that, then that is their choice. And if we push them, say no, it's going to make them happy. You know, what is that teaching them about their decisions, about their body? And it sounds like so trivial, but like that happens. Or like as a kid telling them, you know, if you're at a sleepover and you don't want to stay, I don't care if it's 2 a.m, I will pick you up no matter what, no matter where you are. And then as, you know, aging happens, and, you know, in high school, I don't care where you are. You don't have to make an excuse. You don't have to, you know, you aren't going to have to tell me anything. I will just come and pick you up no matter where you are, if it's feeling unsafe. Or saying, if you don't want to go, you can say it's on me. Like, being able to have that relationship is so important, because, you know, people, you know, they just need to have that lifeline. And if it's not with you, maybe, you know, another supportive adult, maybe, you know, an aunt or uncle or a family friend, you know, having someone to be a lifeline is really important.
It is.
And then, so we were talking, I got sidetracked, safety planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what are some other safety planning things that that we can do with teens, or that we safety plan around?
What I do is, and what some of my friends do as members of our church, before we turn 16, we're not allowed to date until we're 16. So before we turn 16, we, me and some of my friends made a list of all the things that we don't want to do on dates, so that when we actually do go on dates, we know what our standards are, we know what we're okay with and what we're not okay with. And that I also make a safe word to text my dad if something happens. I'll just text him The Office, it's my favorite show, and he'll come and pick me up.
Yeah. Cool. That's great.
Yeah. And I think that's a good illustration. It doesn't have to be an elaborate safety plan, but just as you said, Emma, having that safe word that you can share with a parent, that could make the difference between keeping your child safe or potentially something bad.
And that can be in schools as well,
Yeah.
like with your friends or teachers. Like if you're still in that relationship, like thinking about breaking up, and we know that the violence can escalate at that time. So talking with your friends to have this plan, like walk with me to class, talking with the school resource officer if there is one, to say this is what's going on and I may have to change classes, or when I'm going to work, like how is that going to take place from school to work or to church or wherever you're going. And then the protection from abuse order, if it comes to it, how does that, like here at Family Violence Project, we can sit with you and talk about what a protection from abuse order looks like, who has to be involved as far as caretakers or parents for teens. Like, a lot of it we don't know as advocates as far as what a safety plan. We can't cookie cut and say this is a safety plan because that teen is living that experience. We use their words and find out what's going on to help them create safety for them.
Yeah.
You know, what
So
that looks like.
they're in the driver's seat when they
Mhm.
come to us.
They make all the decisions. We try to empower.
And the protection order really can present its own set of challenges when you have a plaintiff and a defendant or a protected person that attend the same school. A lot of
Yeah.
times they'll be in the same classes, they might be in the same homeroom. There's always the potential they could run into each other in the hallway.
Right.
And that's when it's important to recruit school support staff, administrators, teachers to help support with that safety plan as well.
Mhm.
And just to note, like usually the protection from abuse order, which some people might refer to as a restraining order, if you're a teen, if you're under 18, your parents get it on behalf of you, and if the offending party is also a teen, their parents get it on behalf of them. So it can look very different and feel very confusing also. So, and a lot of teens don't choose to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I haven't seen it all that often. I've seen
Yeah.
it maybe a handful of times in the past 4 or 5 years.
Same.
But it is something that is available to a person who's in an unsafe or abusive situation.
Do we want to talk about why that might be, though, that people don't use it? I know we said a third of teens don't report, so
Yeah.
it kind of goes with that. And I think we talked earlier about school stigma. No one wants to be that person, like that person that did this.
Yeah, and I think you, Michelle, you really hit the nail on the head. People don't want to be characterized as a troublemaker. Those of us that work with survivors certainly don't view them that way, but that to that person that might be their reality, and they don't want to be labeled amongst their peers. And there could be any number of reasons for it. A lot of times it's just easier to not deal with
Mhm.
something like that, and we get it.
And it can be fear-based,
Yeah.
like you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, scared, or not knowing that, wait, this is abuse.
Yeah.
Right.
And it might be they aren't aware that this is even a resource that's available to them. That's why it's important to have these conversations so people do know.
And so, what are some other community supports that are there? Do you want to talk about our services, Shauna?
Sure. So, in Kennebec and Somerset County, we have our helpline as well as school-based educators that go into schools and into the community to talk about teen dating violence, what it is, what it looks like, and what resources are out there as far as school-based resources, police officers, us as advocates. So I go in from preschools, like I said, talk about sharing and respectful communication, the media and how that influences us and our decisions, and then, like I said, go into high schools and really talk about what is healthy and what is unhealthy behaviors, and how does that come out in a relationship.
And then
So then
and
we
you're-
have, we work with also Sexual Assault and Support Crisis Center that goes in and talks about consent, and we work together. We work together to really identify and address any issues that schools or parents are having. Crisis in Counseling is another resource, the National Suicide Prevention, and then there are lines called Break the Cycle that teens can text. And we can get that number to go up so that teens can text if they don't feel like calling our helpline or emailing to talk about what's going on. And then I also go into schools to do one-on-one advocacy, to talk, to know that we're a safe person and help elaborate on a safety plan.
And then there's a school resource officer. Can you talk a little about what you do in the school?
How I've always kind of described the school resource officer program from my perspective is Big Brother in a uniform. Yes, I'm a law enforcement officer, but I want to be that friendly face, that trustworthy person that kids can come to and be able to share openly and know that no judgments will be made, but I will make sure that the information gets passed along to the appropriate person, depending on the situation. But it just might be a matter of checking in with the kid and say, hey, how you doing? What's going on with your life? Everything good? Are you having any issues with anything? I think building that trust and that relationship with kids is really important for law enforcement. And I've seen the positive impact that it has on the other side, not only in my work with domestic violence, but also just working as a patrol deputy.
Yeah, building rapport, so then they
Yeah.
will come to
I
you.
mean, it really is all about relationships,
Yeah.
having those trust relationships with an adult. And, I also make sure I tell kids that, other school staff are there as potential supports as well. One thing I've noticed about my time working in the schools over the past several years is people that are drawn to education, whether it be teachers or principals or the secretary in the office or the cafeteria worker serving lunch, they care about kids. They genuinely do, and they really are concerned about the well-being of their kids, meaning the kids in their school community. So I think that's really an underutilized resource too that kids have available right at their fingertips.
So if a teen is, wondering about their relationship, they have supports. They have supports,
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be one of us. It could be a guidance counselor or a teacher that, really like the cafeteria worker, just someone you have a connection with. We really encourage you to reach out because it is really scary when this is going on, and it is very isolating. Does anyone have any final burning thoughts that they, want to address that we haven't addressed?
I don't know, but maybe, Mary, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? Nothing, Kathy? You've covered it.
I know.
You've covered it, right.
We have
I do have one question though about
We've covered a lot.
when does physical stalking and cyber stalking say? How often does that progress to really physical violence? It's scary. The whole concept of it is really scary to
Right.
me.
I don't have a stat on how often, but we know that it definitely increases danger. Especially, stalking can happen before a relationship, during relationship, after a relationship, or outside of one, but it often does happen during and then continues after. And so we know that, for homicide victims, looking at adults, like 75 or some really high statistics, 75 to 90% of them had stalking before the homicide. So we know it's a factor that definitely contributes to the lack of safety. So if someone is experiencing stalking, we encourage them to reach out. We have a stalking log that people can keep because it is really hard to prove. So being able to say, this happened on this date and really show the connection of this isn't a one-time thing, yes, this is a public place, but this is where I am at this moment, and this person happens to be there too. It's not always a coincidence when it's happening over and over and over. So being able to prove that is really hard, but really
It
important.
goes into GPS tracking, like a lot more, or having a tracker on the cell phone, car.
And technology does it
Yeah,
naturally
yeah.
too, like Snapchat. Apparently, that has a location feature where you know where the person is all the time. So,
Facebook does as
Facebook
well.
does, yeah.
yeah, if you're updating your status, it might
Yeah.
say update, or if you're checking in, or say I go someplace with Mike and he has it on, he may check in and tag me, and then the whole world knows where I am.
Or
So
your pictures will say where you are.
yeah,
you
the
know, like
pictures
you
have the
took this picture.
location, the geo.
And I think another challenge with stalking is, again, sometimes people might not even recognize it as a crime, and I think it's way underreported, a lot like other types of relationship violence.
Like someone calling you over and over and over, that's stalking. Like if it's unwanted, it's stalking, or messaging you constantly, it's stalking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Emma, did you have one thing?
Yeah, going back a little bit, not a little bit, a while ago, I think another reason that some people, when they are abused, specifically sexually, is if they're really young, they might not understand. Like from my experience, when I was younger, something happened and I was really confused because I didn't know what was happening. And so after a few years and I became more experienced with, learned more things, I realized what had happened. And I waited a little while longer to tell someone because it was a close family friend.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew them and I didn't want to get them in trouble. But after a while, my sisters were getting older and I was worried for them, and I was like, if we hang out with this family that they have to know what happened,
Mhm.
so that doesn't happen to my sisters.
Yeah.
And it's just scary to, because usually when something happens, it's someone you know and that maybe your family knows, and you don't want people to think poorly of them. I mean, I don't want people to think poorly of them. But after a while, I just thought I have to tell my parents.
Yeah, it's really scary when that thing when things happen, because there are a lot of feelings, and so being able to process those and have support around you.
And a trusting adult. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
you're lucky you had that relationship and you know with your parents to be able to tell, and that goes back to why some people may not be able to tell. They may not have that protective factor that you have.
And I'm really grateful for my parents for being so kind and so kind of openly, like, they're just so easy to talk to, and I appreciate that. I know they're always there for me, and that I can, tell them stuff.
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
No other burning thoughts? Well, we'll have the Teen Power and Control wheel online, and we'll have an image, because we know that there are so many other ways that abuse can happen. We just skim the surface. And so we just want you to know that we're here for you. No one deserves to be abused. And if you have any questions, you can call our helpline, and we'll see you again next month.
I should be in the schools for teen dating awareness. I'll have a table at most of the local schools so that you can come to me and get a sticker and find out more.
Thank you.